Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 5th day of the month of Elul, 5780, August 25th, 2020. This coming Shabbat we read Parashat Ki Teitzei from Deuteronomy 21:10 and concludes Deuteronomy 25:19, Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war against your enemies. The month of Elul, Ani l'dodi v'dodi li, I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. And that, of course, describes our beautiful relationship with God, with Hashem. And this month, as we prepare for the upcoming high holy days, Yamim Noraim, days of awe, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we are at work, hard at work, going over our lives, going over our past deeds, accomplishments, failures, misgivings, and our hopes and our intentions for the future. And basically we've taken our soul to the garage for work. You know, you take your car in once a year for a tune-up. Our souls need tune-up and repairs when things are broken. And that's what we're doing this month. And of course, every day, every morning of the month of Elul, when we conclude our morning prayer, we hear the shofar. We blow the shofar, and the commandment, of course, on Rosh Hashanah is to hear the shofar. And these days of Elul, as they are preparation for Rosh Hashanah, we hear the shofar every morning. It's a wake-up call for our soul. Wake up, get out of bed, get to work. Lots of work to do. But if we're diligent and we respond to the voice, to the sound of the shofar, and focus ourselves on who we are and who we need to be, then we can be prepared to stand before Hashem, to stand before God, our King, on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur. So, as is the tradition here on Temple Talk, I am going to quote, I should say in parentheses, I'm going to attempt to blow the shofar for you right now, so hold on. Wake up, everybody. Lots of work to do this Elul. But I'd like to now focus on Parashat Ki Teitzei, on the Torah reading this week of Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war. If you go out to war is another way to translate it. I have what to say, and so I'm going to get right down to it. Let's open up. And I'm going to read the first few verses of Ki Teitzei from Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10. I'm going to start in Hebrew and then go into the English. Ki teitzei lemilchama al oyevecha Ki teitzei lemilchama al oyevecha unatano Hashem Elokecha biyadecha v'shavita shivyo v'ra'ita v'shivya eshet yafat Torah v'chashakta ba לקחת לך לאישה והבאת אל תוך ביתך וגילחה את ראשה ועשתה את ציפורניה והסירה את שמלת שבייה מעליה וישבה בביתך ובכתה את אביה ואת אמה ירח ימים ואחר כך תבוא אליה ובעלתה והייתה לך לאישה והיה אם לא חפצת בה ושילחת לנפשה ומחור לא תמכרנה בכסף לא תתאמר בה תחת אשר עינית. And in English, when you will go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem, your God, will deliver him into your hand, and you will capture his captivity. And you will see amongst its captivity a woman who is beautiful of form, and you will desire her. You may take her to yourself for a wife. You shall bring her into the midst of your house. She shall shave her head and let her nails grow. She shall remove the garment of her captivity from upon herself and sit in your house, and she shall weep for her father and her mother for a full month. Therefore you may come to her and live with her, and she shall be a wife to you. But if it shall be that you do not desire her, then you shall send her on her own, but you may not sell her for money. You shall not enslave her, because you have afflicted her. Okay. I think that yes. we're continuing more or less where the last Parshat concluded, which was about warfare, although there was that certain interlude about the decapitated ox, right? But we're picking up again with warfare, and here's a very interesting halacha, a very interesting mitzvah that we're learning here about warfare, and it has to do with an individual in war, right? You're a soldier, and you're fighting against the enemy. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you're victorious. In those days, not like today, where there's a lot of rules in war today and a lot of restrictions. And in those days, in certain battles, you were instructed to kill all the men and sometimes kill all the women as well and children, but sometimes kill all the men and take the women and children as captives. So here's an incident where they're taking the captives, and there's a beautiful woman. From the description, we're talking about a woman of physical beauty, and you, a soldier, say, cast your eye on her, and you say, wow, I want that woman. Now, this is a battle. There's the only people in charge now is the army, right? It's in many times in war at this point, it's just a free for every man for himself. And you see a woman, you take her. No, not here though, because you're battling a war, you're fighting a war, God's war, in God's name. So you see a woman, and even if you have a desire to take that woman, you are not allowed to. However, the Torah understands that people have their urges. People have their physical urges. So in order to not create a situation where a man it basically becomes at war with himself, he's got this physical urge, but he's instructed not to act on it. The Torah gives a path out. A path out. Take this woman into your home for 30 days. She needs to shave her head, not cut her hairs, and mourn for her parents. So basically, she is going to be, the beauty that you saw in her is going to be shorn of her for those 30 days because she's going to be in mourning, right? She's cutting her hair. She's letting her nails grow. Basically, she's not caring for herself physically. You're not to touch her during this time. And after 30 days, if you still desire her for your wife, not for a one-time fling, God forbid, but for your wife, then you may take her for your wife. Okay, she's alone in the world now because she's mourning for her parents. They were killed in battle, obviously. She's alone. You may take her after these 30 days. So on the one hand, the common interpretation here is that the Torah is making a concession to our physical needs, to our human frailties. And instead of trying to break us, and again, we're talking about a soldier who was in a horrific war and survived. And not only survived, but his army is victorious. And, he has, a minute ago, he thought he might not even live. And now, all of a sudden, wow, he's alive and he's in charge. And who's gonna prevent him from doing whatever? So he's in this physical, emotional high, and Torah's telling him, if Torah were to say, you can't do this, he might not be able to abide by what the Torah says. So the Torah says, you have to stop. You can do this, but. And we go through the process that we go through so he can cool down from his high, from his physical high, from his emotional high, and return to himself. And if after 30 days, after he has brought her back into his house, and she has been mourning for her parents, if after 30 days he still sees beauty in her and desires her, he may take her for his wife. Now, I think that is a very telling mitzvah, very telling commandment of Torah, because it shows us, not the only time, in every commandment of the Torah, Torah takes into account our humanity, because it's for us to do these mitzvot, and for us to do as human beings, and for us to do and to grow from doing. There are challenges. Sometimes they're tremendous challenges, and they're challenges that are meant to transform us, to compel us and to impel us and to inspire us to become better people. And that's what this is. Now, there's another interpretation of this entire scenario, which we've mentioned in the past more than once, but I find it to be so compelling, so beautiful, and so enlightening as to what Torah is all about, that I'd like to share it with you once again. And this particular interpretation of this whole passage is brought down by the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the holy Or HaChaim, light of lights, light of life. And this is the name given to Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, Chaim ben Attar, who was a rabbi in Morocco, 17th to 18th century. Actually, he was born in the year 1696, and he passed away in the year 1743. He wrote a beautiful commentary on Torah. He was a Kabbalist and a Talmudist, and one of the greatest rabbis of all generations, and one of the greatest rabbis of Morocco. And I'm going to quickly paraphrase his understanding of this passage. He describes this soldier not as, a soldier who is caught up in a physical desire to take this woman, because he has been so wound up by the adrenaline of battle. He's just, he's all wound up, and he wants a release. He wants to take this woman. No, he describes the soldier differently. This is a soldier in the army of Hashem, right? You have gone out to fight in the army of Hashem, your God. He is a person who is fighting for God's honor. He's fighting because he's been instructed to fight in this war, and it's a battle for that Hashem has sanctioned. So at the end of this war, he is so spiritually high, right? His high comes from a spiritual high, a spiritual adrenaline, not a physical adrenaline. His desire isn't physical, his desire is spiritual, and his spirit is so aroused by the victory that he's been charged with a spirit of prophecy, with Ruach HaKodesh. And he sees this woman, and he sees something beautiful in her. And in fact, he takes here from the Hebrew, Hashakta ba, and you desire something in her, literally. Ba means in her. He's not desiring her outer beauty, her physical beauty. He's desiring a beauty that he sees inside her. He sees a holiness inside her. He sees a spark of holiness inside her. That's what he desires. And that's what he wants to take. And that's what he wants to transform and reveal to her. He sees holiness in her. So, with this understanding, Torah comes to tell us, take her into your house for a month, and she will mourn for her parents. She will shave her head. She will not trim her nails. She will let herself go, physically. So the only thing that is left to desire is what this particular soldier desired from the start, which is the beauty inside her, the holiness inside her, which he will see, whether her outer beauty is left to her physical outer self is left is left to go for 30 days or not. he will still see the spiritual beauty, the holiness, the spark of holiness inside her, even after the 30 days. So, and then of course, he can take her for his wife. And if he doesn't see that after 30 days, he sets her free. So the Or Chaim has, I just think it's the most beautiful understanding of this episode. And again, this episode, both understandings are valid, and what's valid for one soldier is not the same thing that's going to be valid for another soldier. And this brings us back to another point. You know, many of the parashot, many of these Torah readings that we're reading over these few weeks, coming up to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, traditionally rabbis and teachers like to interpret them as on a personal level, as teachings for us how to deal with our lives and prepare ourselves for the upcoming Yamim Noraim, days of awe. For example, last week's parsha, you shall appoint judges and officers in all your gates. And an interpretation of that is all your gates are all your orifices, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth. You need to set up judges and officers there. You need to police yourself. You need to judge yourself. What goes in, what goes out, what you hear, what you allow yourself to hear, and what you allow yourself to say. I'm not going to go into this at length, but again, that's a way to interpret these rules about establishing a society in the land of Israel, and to reinterpret them on a very personal level. So if we take what we just learned now about the Eshet Yafat Torah, the women of beauty, which is how this parasha, this little story is described, the title is given, Eshet Yafat Torah, we can apply that to our own personal lives as well. And in fact, when it opens up, Ki Teitzei lemilchama al oyevecha, when you go out to war against your enemies, and the question is that's been asked is, when you go out to war, you always go out against your enemies. Why does it have to be described here? Why does it have to be included against your enemies? Who else do you go to war against? So we're taught that it emphasizes that our enemies are our own pitfalls, our own foibles, our own weaknesses. That there are many enemies that we need to go out to battle against. But on a personal level, we have enemies within. We have our own weaknesses, our own failings, which need to be fought against and overcome. And when we overcome them, we can rise to a higher level. We can grab onto that spiritual high that our second soldier grabbed onto, and lift ourselves up, and gain that inkling of Ruach HaKodesh, of prophecy maybe, and pull ourselves up and reach the next level and carry on from there. It's this particular story of the Eshet Yafat Torah, I just think teaches us so much about human nature and about how Torah relates to our human nature. From I can't say from day one, from day six. From day 6, when God created man, God understood his creation perfectly. And at times, God is frustrated by man. God can be angered by man, and sometimes God, I think, can scratch his head, as it were, at the actions of man. But God does understand us and does understand our makeup and who we are. And God certainly understands that we are a spiritual entity which has been cast into a physical being. It is God who breathed life into our earthly body. So God perfectly understands who we are and what we're up against and whom we need to overcome, mainly ourselves. So I think this opening passage in Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war, And this week's Torah reading is just so telling, so revealing. Ki Teitzei is like a grab bag full of all sorts of commandments, all sorts of mitzvot. It's almost like a stream of consciousness, very associative, how it goes from one set of commandments to something which seems to be completely unrelated, but there is a relationship, or to go from something which is a commandment for the klal, for society at large, for the body of Israel, and into commandments that are for individuals, and some commandments that are for individuals in very specific situations. We don't have time to really go over all the different things in this week's reading, but we'll just quickly mention a few. Right after this incident of the Eshet Yifat Torah, the beautiful woman, beautiful captive woman, we are told about a man has two wives. One is his favorite and one is his least favorite. And when each one has a son, and he wants to, the firstborn son gets a greater inheritance than the other children. That's the rule. That's the law. That's the Torah. And even though his firstborn son may come from the wife that he likes least, he can't switch it around and make the first and give the inheritance to the son of the wife he loves more. Okay, and then it goes on to, if a man and a woman have a child who is a wayward child, he doesn't listen to him. In Hebrew, it's called a ben sorel moreh, and he's a glutton and he's disrespectful. What should they do? You bring him to the judges in the city and say, "This our son. He doesn't listen to us." And the judges say, "Well, if that's the case, then we'll call on the townspeople to stone him to death." Wow, that's harsh. Anyway, our sages have understood this little incident here with such sensitivity. Again, he's a son, he's a child. If he's a child, he's not responsible. But if he's an adult, he's not a child. So when exactly is he fall into this category of a son who is still under the rule of his parents, but yet is not a juvenile, and therefore not responsible? You can't. A juvenile can't commit a crime. You can't put him to death because he's obnoxious. So it turns out, without getting into detail, we're talking about a time period of maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then, if you read it very carefully, it says he doesn't listen to the voice of his father or his mother, and our sages teach us that, well, if what the father says is not the exact same thing that the mother says, if their message isn't clear and not completely as one, then you can't expect the child to be able to understand it or listen to it. So basically, what happens is that they make it becomes impossible for such a case to really ever exist in reality. However, it is a warning. It's a warning, that children should be obedient, and also a warning to parents that they have to take the responsibility for their children's misbehavior. They may be doing their best, they may be great parents, but something's a little askew. And the last thing you can do is take your child out to the judges and say, we want to do away with this kid, he's rotten. Anyway, it's a very fascinating little commandment here. We're not going to dwell on that any further. All sorts of mitzvot here, commandments about social justice, really. You can't withhold payment of a worker. You have a day work, you need to pay him on that day. He needs the money. You need to treat strangers properly with respect and make sure they have a livelihood and are taken care of. You are strangers in Egypt. Moving right along. You find a donkey or an ox that seems to have strayed from its owner. You need to try to return it to its owner. If you don't know who the owner is, you need to take it into your house and take care of it and wait for the owner to come looking for it. This is, of course, you find something in the street today, you need to pursue whoever might have owned it. You put up a sign, you say, I found such and such a thing, and with your contact information, and the person will call you. If they can describe it properly, then you return it to them. We're taught later in the Torah reading, an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter the assembly of Hashem. Even the 10th generation shall never enter the assembly of Hashem, because they did not greet you with bread and water on the way when you left Egypt, and because he, meaning Moab, hired Bilam, the son of Beor from Petor in Aram, and Ramnaraim, against you to curse you. We know that story from the book of Numbers about Bilam, and we know that the nation of Ammon and the nation and Moab did not allow Israel to pass through their land. Israel said, "Let's pass through your land. Let us pass through your land onto our way, into our land, and we won't take from the food of your fields. We won't even drink from the streams. We will just walk through. We have our own provisions." And they said no, and in fact, we went to war against them. On the other hand, we're told, you shall not despise an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not despise an Egyptian, if you are a sojourner in his land. Even though Egypt enslaved us, they first welcomed Israel. And we need to remember that. And children who are born to them, that is to Edom or Egypt, in the 3rd generation may enter into the assembly of Hashem. So many things to learn in this parsha. Again, read it, take your time, and it's best, really best, to read it with some kind of commentary, Jewish commentary. There's many available today in English, online, and of course in print. And it's most enlightening to study it with all the commentaries. Now, the parsha concludes in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 17, concludes with this: "You shall remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Egypt, how he happened upon you on the way and cut off all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it will be, when Hashem your God grants you respite from all your enemies around you in the land which Hashem your God gives to you as an inheritance to possess, that you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. You shall not forget." This, of course, is a reprise of the original story of Amalek, which we read in the book of Exodus, right after Israel left Egypt. It's in Exodus chapter 17, verse 8, is where the original story is about Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim, and how Moses said to Joshua, "Pick men for us," and how they fought. We're not going to go into that. And we know that when Moshe held his hands up, Israel would prevail, and when he dropped his hands, Israel would then Amalek would prevail, and eventually Aaron and Hor both held up Moshe's hands, so that Israel were able to prevail over Amalek. And then we're told, at that time, Hashem said to Moshe, "Inscribe this as a memorial in the book, and recite it into Yoshua's ears, and I will surely obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens." Then Moshe built an altar, and he named it, "The Lord is my miracle," Hashem Nisi. And he said, "For there is a hand on the throne of the Eternal, that there shall be a war for Hashem against Amalek from generation to generation." In Hebrew, that is, Vayomer ki yad al kes ya, milchama l'Hashem Amalek midor dor. So there's going to be a war. you know what? There's going to be a war against Amalek in all generations. There's every generation, there's an Amalek that rises up. There's someone who rises up to fight against Israel, who hates Israel for no reason, who just happens to be feeling that way. Hates Israel. You see it this generation, of course, the anti-Semitism right now in the world is out of control. And it's Amalekian because it's just baseless hatred. Oh, they give you all sorts of reasons to make them up if they have to. All sorts of reasons to hate Israel, to hate Jews. But it's baseless. It's just out of control hatred. It's Amalek of this generation. Anyway, back to what we were saying. So this battle goes on in every generation. From the first generation of the Exodus, just as after they left, they had just left Egypt. They had just crossed the Sea of Reeds. And already there is someone waiting for them to take them down, Amalek. And then we're told at the conclusion of this week's reading that therefore it will be when Hashem your God grants you respite from all your enemies among you in the land which Hashem your God gives to you as an inheritance to possess, that you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. You shall not forget. This is our final enemy. The final war is against Amalek, because we've made peace. We've conquered all our enemies around us, and we've made peace with all our neighbors. So this war goes from generation to generation, as we're told, until this time. And what are we told by Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah, in the final chapter of Mishnah Torah, which is the laws of kings and wars? It opens up, Israel was enjoined with 3 commandments upon entering the land: to appoint a king, as it says, you shall appoint a king over yourselves, from Deuteronomy 17:15, to destroy the descendants of Amalek, as it says, erase the memory of Amalek, what we've read here in our reading, and build the temple, as it says, you shall seek his habitation, and there you will come, from Deuteronomy 12:5. We read that 2 weeks earlier in Parashat Re'eh. So this is it. The Mikdash, the Holy Temple, is built when Amalek has been vanquished. And if it hasn't been done before the king arrives, and it's up to the king to take care of it before we appoint a king. Doesn't mean that we have to wait for a king in order to destroy Amalek and build a holy temple. No. But if, as an as a people, we haven't done these things, then it will be up to responsibility of the king, and that's how we'll know that it's really our king, if he takes on these things successfully. So, destroy Amalek, and set a king upon ourselves, and build a holy temple. That's how we wrap up our return to the land of Israel. And one last thing I'd like to say, a beautiful teaching which I've heard in the name of Rabbi Nachman Kahana, who is a rabbi today in Israel, and he quotes from Psalm 132:13. For Hashem has chosen Zion. He desired it for his habitation. Zion, Sion, is actually the place of the Holy Temple. All of Israel is referred to as Zion as well, but the place of the Holy Temple is Sion. It means the mark. It means X marks the spot. That's the spot. That's the place. That is where the temple is to build. He desired it for his habitation. In Hebrew, he desired it for his habitation is Iva Lemoshav Lo. Iva, he desired it. Now, those letters of Iva, they make up the missing letters that are missing from those words we read in the conclusion of the story of Amalek in Exodus. For there's a hand on the throne of the Eternal. Ki kes al yad Hashem. Kisei, it should be, but it's missing the Aleph. Hashem is missing the 2 last letters. Aleph, Vav, He. Iva Lemoshav Lo. This is the place that God desires. The place, Zion, the Holy Temple, Temple Mount. This is it. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.